What if Pokemon from Infinite Fusion were in Gen 1 OU? Now, this is a very, very complicated question to answer, and one that I can't really do in the traditional way I do my videos. The main reason for that is because there is no Gen 1 custom games for Fusion Pokemon, which is very unfortunate. But luckily, there's a place called Pokeathlon where you can actually play with Fusion Pokemon in their own format. I'm sure most of you already know about the game Pokemon Infinite Fusion, and not as many of you, but I'm sure some of you already knew that you can actually play the format yourself. If you've ever gone on Pokemon Showdown, it's literally just like that. Just a different website, but also one that's completely free. You can just look up online and it's there. So that had me thinking, what if we did something like that, but, to be more of my style with Gen 1? Unfortunately, you can't put Infinite Fusion Pokemon in Gen 1 custom games. And if there is, I feel like what I'm doing instead is much more fun. You see, I'm going to be hosting a tournament that is Gen 9 Ubers, but it's only Kanto Pokemon, evolutions to Kanto Pokemon like Steelix, regional variants like Alolan Ninetales, convergent evolutions like Bugtrio, and paradox Pokemon of Kanto Pokemon like Screamtail. It is huge, very vast, and oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about. We've been testing the format for about a few weeks now, I would say. I, for one, have made a lot of different teams. And we're going to be having the tournament this Saturday, at the time this video is being recorded, which is June 30th. So how am I going to go over this? How am I going to talk about how these Pokemon would do? This is actually going to be instead of a mini-series, and I promise that for all the other ones, I will try to talk about how Fusion Pokemon will do in an actual Gen 1 format. The way it'll be done is, I will make it to where there's, let's say a Pokemon with Chansey. I'll go over some of the different Chansey fusions with RBY Pokemon, and try to talk about how it will do with Gen 1 mechanics in a Gen 1 format. But for this video, everything we have here, these are all the Pokemon legal, and I will rank them based on how they do in Gen 9 mechanics, and just how well I think they're going to do in a format with just each other. Also, in case you don't know how Fusion actually works, I can show you an example right now, alright? So let's say we're making a new team. And let's say you're thinking about something you want to add. So let's say Onix, for example. But you add Onix, and here it is. You see its stats. It's still an Onix, so not the best thing in the world. So you gotta fuse it with something that you think would help it out a lot. It will combine the base stat total, so it's gonna be something very similar to, I think it's always gonna be the same base stat total as the higher one. So let's fuse it with Chansey, for example. So it depends on which Pokemon is the head and which one is the body, I'm pretty sure. So this still has its same base stat total as like an Onix, but switch this and notice how the HP and defense are pretty high. You're combining the best and worst parts of the Pokemon. And this right here, you have a Chansey that's normal ground. And the movesets are also just combined. But to show a better example of that, let me think. Okay, let's do Scizor. So you have Scizor and you have, all of the moves that it has. And let's fuse it with Alakazam. So now you have a Bug Psychic. The stats probably are in your favor, or this one might be. But you'll have just a combination of both the Pokemon's moves and their stats, all that. And you could choose between any of their abilities. So now that we have that out of the way, let's go back to this tier list and try to rank all of this, except for Meowth. I'm not sure why that's there. Now to start off, I'm going to say that there's one Pokemon that is truly banned, and that's Mewtwo. Mewtwo in no way, shape, or form is going to be allowed. And before you ask, isn't the format technically in National Dex Gen 9 Ubers? That's true, but the only reason for that is because anything goes doesn't have a sweep clause. Because you see, some Pokemon in normal National Dex, such as Alakazam and BLUESKY, are just outright banned. And we couldn't be able to use them if we just did OU. So that's why we're doing this instead. Speaking of which, I think I want to go over 2 Pokemon right away. Those are Alakazam and Dragonite. Let me try to find them here. There's honestly so much here, and I'm very confident this tier is gonna take... it's gonna take a while. So starting up with Dragonite. Dragonite got banned because it was just... or not fully banned. Okay, I probably should have worded that better. For Zam and Dragonite, unlike Mewtwo, you can still use them. But for those two, and along with BLUESKY and Chansey, you just can't fuse with them. All of these Pokemon are pretty strong in their own right, but they do kind of become unreasonable when given new moves, especially abilities, or just fusing with the perfect Pokemon for it. It's a little too much to really deal with. For Alakazam, for example, Magic Guard with high speed just makes everything a really good sweeper. And another important point you need to know is that when Pokemon fuse, they can sometimes get new signature moves. For example, fuse Alakazam with Electrode. Not only do you have a very scary Magic Guard Pokemon with 140 speed, but it suddenly gets the new signature move Mind Blown, which is the same one as Bucephalon. But Bucephalon, when he uses Mind Blown, takes 1/2 recoil. Because of Magic Guard, you don't get that. Or you can fuse Alakazam with Gengar to have a very scary Psychic Ghost type. There's just so many opportunities to switch it, and it's just too overpowered. And Dragonite is very similar. But with Dragonite, a lot of it comes from extreme speed. Because Dragonite, you need to know that there's multiple Pokemon that can change their normal attack. For example, there's Galvanites with a Alolan Golem. And I'm gonna have to look for it because I know I forgot about it, but Sylveon is also a major threat sometimes because it's very easy to abuse things with Pixelate, which turns a normal move into a fairy move, and then you have to deal with it with it's not just getting stabbed, it's also just getting a boost with its Pixelate as well. And that's not even counting things like Life Orb or the Pixie Plate to make it even more devastating. It's really hard to deal with. So both of those, either electric or fairy coverage, really hard to switch into for Dragonite. But then you can have things like Snorlax to have good normal stab, really bulky, and you don't care about your speed because you can just use extreme speed. You have Kangaskhan so that you can have Scrappy, you can hit through things anyways. I am struggling to find Sylveon. Oh, whatever, I'll just deal with it later. But yeah, the point is, Dragonite is really scary. And I personally just wanted to ban Dragonite and Alakazam outright, but people wanted them to just be banned from their fusions and still use the base Pokemon. And I eventually conceded to that. And I'll be honest, I have not really seen much of Dragonite or Alakazam. By the way, you are the berries allowed to fuse with themselves. So you can fuse a Dragonite with a Dragonite. It doesn't change the base stats, but it does make their sprites different, which is probably worth it. So where do we rank these? I think for Dragonite, I think we're going to put it in B1. Because it still has multi-scale, which by the way is another very strong tool you can use with it. Also just the fact that it has high base stats and is very bulky in general. Not to mention the Dragon type is a great type to give to things. It's really pretty strong even on its own. Heavy duty boots because it's Gen 9 is pretty nice as well. But I think there's better sweepers. Not only that, but there's just a lot of really good steel types, especially fairy types, and it really makes it hard for Dragonite to do stuff. There's also the fact that even though it's mostly Gen 1 Pokemon, since we're also including evolutions as well as regional variants and stuff like that, there's Gengar, but there's also Annihilape and Alolan Marowak, and I even think Haunter is usable. So there's also just more ghost types that can just eat up extreme speed, but still pretty good in its own right. Now Zam, I think it's probably enough to stay in OU, but I'm really not too impressed with it. I think Alakazam, it's fast, but also just a little bit too frail for this format. Because in general, everything is massively bulkier, and things usually have the perfect type combinations to deal with mostly anything. So Zam kind of struggles with that. I just struggle to see Zam breaking through a lot of teams. But also at the same time, Magic Guard and High Speed is still pretty useful. So, not the worst, but I'm personally not going to consider it. Now what I will consider is Blissey. Blissey is actually the main reason I'm now happy that we decided to do this. Because yeah, Pissy just being a pink blob that can help you is really useful. At first, I thought that just having Snorlax fused with something like a Fable or Kangaskhan was already good enough. But no, you just don't have the same merit as you do with just a base Blissey. And it's not really because of the bulk. I think Snorlax, regardless of what you fuse it with, is bulky enough to wall any special attacker. And there's plenty of options to give it recovery. But it's mostly just Blissey just having... I think Teleport is just the main thing that makes Blissey so good. The fact that it's just so good at pivoting, eating special moves, paralyzing, or toxicking, it just really helps you out a lot. But you're probably not too surprised. Blissey has been consistently good for years. So yeah, good for Blissey. Now Chansey, I'm going to put at the top of C1. And just like the others, it's banned, which is good. Honestly, if Chansey was allowed to fuse, it might be better than Blissey because you can use Eviolite. At the same time, you could just combine Blissey with an Eviolite Pokemon, so I don't know. But when comparing the two, Chansey kinda needs Eviolite to be bulkier, while Blissey is free to run heavy-duty boots, which definitely makes it considerably better than Chansey, in my opinion. Now, that's it for the sorta bans and the definitely banned. I think it's time to go over the actual Pokemon themselves, and... oh boy, there's still so much to talk about. And I do not know why I was struggling so much to find Sylveon, but we're going to talk about Sylveon later. For now, let's go with... I guess we'll just do the order that they're here. So, Venusaur... Venusaur is... I guess it has Sweet Powder and Chlorophyll, but... I don't know. It's not the best grass type in my opinion. And not the best Chlorophyll setter either. It's important to note that even though it's Kanto Pokemon and it's Gen 9 National Dex, we're not going to include Mega Evolutions. So, that's a big reason as to, you know, kind of hinder Venusaur's viability. I will be honest, so far with all of the testing that I've done and with the replays that I've seen, I've not really seen anyone use Sleep too much. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but in terms of sleepers, you have... I think there's better options, like... Exeggutor is probably better, and maybe Toedsquirrel, but also maybe not. One thing that you should know is that Spore is banned, which, you know, I think is a bit of a good thing. But overall, the poison and grass moves are good, but I just don't think it's gonna do that much. I'm gonna put in C2. And for Charizard, I just don't like Solar Power that much. And if you want a Fire Flying type, Moltres is right there and is significantly better. I'm a big Charizard fan, but I really don't think it's gonna be that good. Blastoise, on the other hand, I think is actually quite useful. Not like super good, but I think the utility that Blastoise has does help it set it apart from other water types. The thing that helps Blastoise is mostly Rapid Spin and Body Press. It has pretty good defense, so having max defense and just hitting something super hard, that's pretty good. And Rapid Spin in general, I think is just a really nice tool to have. It also helps you confuse Blastoise with something like, let's say, Kangaskhan for Scrappy, so that you can still be pretty bulky, while also being able to Rapid Spin Ghost types, and even hit them with Body Press. So I think there's definitely something you can do there. Butterfree is pretty niche, but the thing with Butterfree is that it has Compound Eyes with Sweet Powder and Stun Spore. So it's kinda like Spore. It's still a Butterfree, so its base stats are incredibly low, but as like a Suicide Weed, I think it has things it could be doing. Now Pikachu is just not very good at all, but it actually did cause a ban, because Light Ball and Thick Club end up being way too good. You can fuse Pikachu with anything, such as Sylveon or Alolan Golem, and you have Fake Out and Extreme Speed, with an attack higher than most Uber's legendaries. That is a little unreasonable, so we had to get rid of that. But Raichu, I think I'm going to put this top of C tier. Raichu, it doesn't have Light Ball, but Fake Out and Extreme Speed are still really valuable tools to have. And it's also an electric type with access to Surf. So that's already pretty useful. And it can fuse with Sylveon, or the most I've seen is usually Alolan Golem, which is really powerful. Fake Outs, Extreme Speeds, or Explosions. But you're still using a Raichu. I'm not too impressed with the base stats, and in general, I feel like it's not the most unreasonable thing to deal with. As for Alolan Raichu, I really don't know. I could see this being either B2 or C1. But I just think the problem with Alolan Raichu is that you have other Psychic types you could be using. You have Base Alakazam, you have Magic Bounce Espeon, you have Mew, and I guess the one reason you would use Alolan Raichu would be with Electric Terrain. But also, what are you using as your Electric Terrain setter? Because you want to abuse electric moves, you can just use Golem. If you're using Alolan Golem, you're better off just focusing on priority moves. The electric terrain isn't really helping you too much. So I don't know, I don't really see too much of a vision with it. Now for Sandslash, the interesting with Sandslash is that some of its fusions give it 1,000 arrows. So it's a ground type that can hit flying Pokemon, and also Rapid Spin is just pretty good. Unfortunately, when it comes to weather, we have both of the Ninetales setting sudden snow, and we have Politoed with Drizzle, but we don't have a Sandstream Pokemon, so Sandslash doesn't actually have too many ways to take advantage of its Sandstream ability, so that's a bit unfortunate. Actually, I think I'm going to put it in C1. What I will put in B2, however, is Alolan Sandslash. Ice Steel isn't really that bad, especially since Steel is its secondary typing. There's plenty of Pokemon with Technician, which means you can take advantage of Alolan Sandslash. The defense is still pretty nice, and Rapid Spin's still pretty good. But if you fuse this with Scizor, for example, it still keeps the Bug Steel typing, but now Scizor has access to Ice Shard and Icicle Crash, or Spear, whatever it's called. You know, the one that Koitzer uses, 25. You can give it loaded dice, and it can hit 4 or 5 times. And if you boost each one of those with Technician, and it hits at least 4, That's still a lot of damage that your Scizor Fusion is doing, even without Stab. So I think it's pretty good. And for Beedrill, this normally wouldn't be a Pokemon I would really consider, but one of the people in the server, Myrox, has actually been trying to make it work. And the way he did that is by having Beedrill fused with Farfetch'd, specifically the Galarian version. And that's because of its item, I think it's called I forget, it's something leak. The point is, there's a leak that the Farfetch'd Pokemon can use, which significantly ups their critical hit rate. And if you give any, high crit move, like let's say, or Cross Poison, for example, there's a pretty good chance to crit. So, what Myrox did was he has a Beedrill that's bug fighting with attack order, which has a high critical hit rate, first impression, and I believe drill run and a fourth move. I forget what it is, but the point is it has super high crits, and Beedrill, it's either Beedrill or Farfetch'd, but one of them has Sniper, which makes moves hit way harder when you get a crit. So Beedrill is actually kinda scary, because on the right hand, it can just crit and one-shot a lot of things. It's actually kinda terrifying, so I'm actually gonna put it in C1. Probably at the bottom though, let's not get too carried away, but yeah, you gotta respect it. You also should probably respect Nidoking as well. Sheer Power is a very busted move, or ability I should say, and Nidoking has a lot of good options in terms of coverage. Now granted, I'm not sure the best Pokemon to fuse it with. It's probably a Pokemon that has a primary Fairy typing, so maybe Sylveon, or I think Screamtail was primarily a Psychic first, so not that. I guess there's a Clefable. The point is, there's definitely things you can use with Nidoking with, and I think it's pretty good. I don't think you need to, however, so Nidoking is probably a little less good, but still, it's nice to have. Now, Pidgeot, I just think has nothing going for it. And since I'm here, I think I'm also going to put Parasect. Since there's no Spore, Parasect has nothing it really wants to do. The only reason I can think of using it would be for Dry Skin, but even then, I'm just not very impressed. Raticate has Guts, which is something. Same with Super Fang, but I think there's just better users of those. And Alolan Raticate is probably a little bit better, because you have Sucker Punch, but in general, I'm just not a big fan of it. Now, Ninetales. This is where things get interesting. I'm definitely going to put it in A2. Ninetales just has a lot of things going for it, and I think it's probably better here than it is in, like, Gen 5, for example. Sun is just really nice to abuse, and there's a lot of Pokemon that you could potentially abuse with it. It's more than just fire types, for example. Like, a good example, the fact that we have, Screamtails and Sandy Shocks. These are Pokemon that can use photosynthesis that can do good in the sun. You also have other Pokemon that can just get an insane amount of damage. Like, imagine fusing Moltres with something, and then you put it in the sun. That's pretty scary. Think about, like, something like Exeggutor with Chlorophyll. Something that I've done is I fuse Alolan Exeggutor with Blastoise and give it a Lumberry with Harvest. In the sun, I think Harvest always brings back the berry. So I would like to do is I would use Lumberry with Rest, immediately regain all of my HP and get unstatused, and then you get it back immediately. That's just some of the ways you can abuse Sun. And you could also just kind of use Sun as its own just individual sweeper. because there's a lot of pivoting in Infinite Fusion, and a lot of things are bulkier, so a lot of times just having a strong overheat Pokemon can be what you need to break the stalemate. It also helps that you can fuse Ninetales with all the fast things. The most popular ones I've seen are either Alolan Persian with Parting Shot, or Electrode, which not only gives Ninetales a lot of speed, but Fire Electric is a pretty good offensive typing. So overall, there's a lot that Ninetales can do, and it's pretty good. And while we're here, I think I'm also going to talk about the Alolan version. And then I'm going to put this in S2. Alolan Ninetales is probably the best weather setter. And the reason for that is because it's not really used offensively like you would with Ninetales and Politoed. It's mostly for Aurora Veil. But now you get to use Aurora Veil without the weaknesses of Ice typing. Fairy is a great type to have. So put this thing on anything bulky, and you just get a free Aurora Veil. The main one that I've been seeing is fusing with Mew. Mew has 100 in every base stat, and Psychic isn't really holding Psychic too much back. So you just have an incredibly bulky Pokemon that has a hard time dying to anything, and is great support for your team. Despite it being pretty good, I also think it's pretty manageable, even if you don't have weather of your own. So that's the reason why it's not going to be an S1. But still, Alolan Ninetales is probably one of the best support Pokemon we have. And I think I'm going to go back now, because I think I remember where Sylveon's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be near the fossils, if I remember correctly. And Sylveon, it's a Pokemon I use a lot. And I think it's one that people have definitely been kind of scared of, but I don't think it's unreasonable. I definitely think it's high tier and probably... Yeah, I think I'd definitely go say it's OU. But the question is where in OU? Pixelate is a very good ability, but at the same time, there's so many things that, you know, resist Fairy now that we have some pretty good steel types. I think I'm going to put Sylveon in A2. Because you have Snorlax fusions, you have Blissey, a lot of things that can, you know, take it. But it's also a lot of things that can abuse it. Another example would be Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan does pretty good with Pixelate and Fake Out. That hits pretty hard. So, just a pretty good Pokemon for offensive purposes. You can also use Sylveon with something like Sandy Shocks for Fairy Ground, which is just terrifying. So yeah, that's pretty good. Dugtrio's kind of weird. You have Stab, Earthquake, and Speed, but I think the bulk really holds you back. But it's also pretty usable still. I'd probably put it in... I think I'll put it right here. And I'm going to put the original variant around the same area. You get the Steel typing, which is pretty good. But you also... You also lose a bit of speed. And if you're trying to fuse something with Dugtrio, I think you're trying to go all out on speed, so... Yeah, I just wouldn't really recommend that. I wouldn't recommend Fearow or Wigglytuff either. I don't even think they're worth talking about. I just can't think of any good niches with them. Arbok's niche isn't very good, but the two, or I guess three things Arbok has going for it is Intimidate, Coil, which, you know, boosts attack, defense, and accuracy, and Toxic Spikes. And if it doesn't get Toxic Spikes, at the bare minimum, being able to be, you know, like, an absorbent of them. It's not the best thing in the world, especially since there's better Intimidate users, and there's better, I would say, Toxic Spikes users as well. But interesting. I cannot think of anything that Poliwrath has going for it, so I think I want to look up Poliwrath to see if there's anything here. You got Water Absorb, Damp, and Swift Swim. Not looking very good, and its stats are pretty okay, I guess, but yeah, I just don't see anything here, really. It's just the standard things you would see for Water and fighting types. Because of the stats alone, I'll put it in C2, but I'm not impressed. What does impress me, though, is Clefable. Clefable with a Magic Guard and Unaware. Both are two extremely good abilities, and it gives Clefable, and especially its fusions, a lot of versatility. Clefable also has Knockoff, Stealth Rock, Thunder Wave, Soft Boiled. It just has so many options that can help its team, or it can help whatever it's with. You can even go for Combine and try to sweep. There's just a lot of good things with Clefable here. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think Clefable is one of the Pokemon that fuses with the strongest fusion I think exists in this format. We'll go over that in a little bit. I don't think there's much I can really say else. Now for Golem, don't really like Golem that much. It has competition with Alolan Golem, and also has competition with Rhydon and Rhyperior. And both have their own merits in this format. So Golem just kind of gets left forgotten. The Arcanines, I'm going to put both of them at the top of C1. Both are pretty interesting and pretty good offensively, but I just think are barely not good enough for OU. They have extreme speed, so fuse them with something like Sylveon and Fire Fairy is a very dangerous offensive core. But I just think defensively, Fire just holds it back a lot. It's just not something that I just am going to consider using. I think you have much safer options when it comes to like extreme speed users or just even fire users, if you ask me. Persian's kind of neat, but just better fake out users, but the speed is interesting. And what's also interesting is Alolan Persian, because Alolan Persian has the ability Fur Coat, which is like Fluffy on Furfrout, where it boosts defense with an ability, but the big difference is that you're not weak to fire. It's just a permanent defense boost on any Pokemon. That gives so many things way more options, and it's not like Dark is a bad typing anyways. Also, Persian's also pretty fast and has Parting Shot, so along with the defense boost and the decent speed, you just have a way to tank things, pivot, lower the opponent's offenses, and switch into something else. There's a lot of versatility with the Alolan Persian, and I think that makes it pretty viable. We're not going to bother with Golduck, but we are going to talk about Slowbro. Slowbro and its twin, Slowking, are some of the kings in this format. They're some of the few Pokemon with Regenerator, but I think it's more than just that. I think it's also that Water is just a good type to give something defensively. You fuse this thing with anything that can get rid of your Psychic typing, and it does pretty good. It is, in fact, some people kind of hate it, but both of them even together are pretty good, since you can give them a secondary typing that makes them not have too much of the same overlap. For example, you can make one Grass Water and the other one maybe something like Fairy or Dragon Water. So Regenerator is really good, and they have Slowking has Chilling Reception, which is pretty good even if you're not using a snow-based team. Because again, Ninetales and Politoed are very good, so being able to completely stop their weather is very handy. But just as many people use snow, so be careful. You also have Slowbro with Teleport, which if you ask me, I like way more since Teleport has negative priority. It makes it very interesting, and I know some people hate the Regenerator twins, but in my opinion, it kind of makes the format a little bit better. It just gives everyone a very easy choice to put on their team that can help them if they're needing some time to recover or just to really think about how to deal with something. Or if your opponent gets a boost and you just really need something that might be able to tank it. It definitely helps that you also have moves like Scald or Thunder Wave to help you. Slack Up's pretty good. And these guys also have regional variants I'm struggling to find here. I don't think anyone's used Galarian Slowbro yet, which I found right now. He's right here. I think the issue is that I just don't think Psychic Poison is as good, so I'm gonna lower this to A2, I think. That's assuming it has Regenerator, which I'm pretty sure it still does, since Glow King still has Regenerator, and it's pretty good. Glow King, I think, is a little bit better, but that's because I think it's easier to use the poison typing with Glow King. Although this might just be bias on my part. I can't see it right now, but I'll look for it later. But Glow King, I think, is probably... I'd probably put Glow King at S2, in my opinion. Primeape, I just don't think there's anything to do with it. Tentacruel is interesting. Toxic Spikes and Rapid Spin are always pretty good. Same with the water typing. But I think the main reason you're using Tentacruel is for its really good special defense. But I think it also has the exact same typing as Toedscruel. Well, not typing, I mean base stats. And Toedscruel, I think, just has more to offer. Venomoth I actually kind of like. I might be one of the few people that's tried using it. But the thing about Venomoth is that it has tilted lens. So it can make everything do double damage if it's resisted. It gives Venomoth an interesting niche, but one that's hard to really take advantage of, considering Venomoth doesn't have the best base stats. Rapidash I think is pretty interesting. Because for those who don't know, Rapidash actually has an ability that's kind of anti-poison. It's with this one here. Pastel Veil, what's the name? Pastel Veil, I think that's how you say it. Either way, the Pokemon in its always cannot be poisoned, and on switching it cures poison Pokemon. So, if you want to use this as a way to just be sort of just immunity in a way, it's interesting. But it's more so because it's Psychic Fairy. If a Pokemon is trying to go with Toxic Spikes, which are pretty good this format, having it with Psychic's pretty good, or you can put it as something with Fairy, so you have to worry about Toxic. There's options you can do there. And in general, just being a strong Fairy type is always a plus. Now, Magneton I think is interesting. I think I'll put Magneton in B2 around here, I think. Magnet Pull and the Steel type are the main reasons you want to use it. But Eviolite's also pretty good. And I think being faster than Magnezone also matters sometimes, depending on what speed mark you're trying to go for. It's a pretty usable Pokemon, even without Eviolite. Dodrio's probably usable, but I don't know. I think there's better flying type abusers and better normal types. So not one you should really think about too much. Rapidash, I don't think there's much you can really do either. I think Rapidash just kind of gets outclassed by other fire types. Executor's pretty good, but I'm just not sure if it's enough to actually be an OU. But I think it's definitely on the verge of being there. It has, you know, ways to use, like, what's it called? Status, its high special attack is pretty good. Harvest you can take advantage of. Chlorophyll you can take advantage of. But I think it's just a little too sun reliant. And because of that, I'm just not the biggest fan. Golem, I'm going to put in B1. I think, yeah, probably the top of B1. Galvanize is just a really good ability to have. And with Magnet, I think its explosion goes over 300 base power or something like that. So it's stupid strong. Now, the Farfetches, I'm just going to put in C2. There's ways to abuse them, but it's really niche, I think. Gengar does super, super well. Gengar would not have to worry about its poison typing for the most part, since you're going to fuse it with something better. And normally you're fusing with something very fast. So Gengar with good coverage and the ability to, you know, not worry about ground moves for once, it ends up having a lot to offer on a team. Victreebel's probably a better Venusaur in many cases, especially since it has Weather Ball. Actually, I think Venusaur might also have it. Okay, maybe these two should just be in the exact same tier. I just can't think of any real reason to use one over the other. Dewgong, we can just skip. And I'll go over Haunter, because I don't think Haunter's going to be enough to make in the OU. But with Eviolite, it's actually pretty usable. It has high special attack, and 95 speed is nothing to really sneeze at. Not to mention, you're allowed to use Eviolite with it, which I think is actually pretty useful. I'm not sure if I remember to include it, but Kadabra should also be here. I'd have to look. Honestly, we still have so many other Pokemon to cover. Maybe I should worry about that later. But Kadabra is a lot of the same ways with Haunter. But the difference with Kadabra here is that Magikarp is just a pretty good ability, one that's probably better. Although I will say that Haunter also has Levitate, and obviously Levitate is pretty good. It also means that you can have it be the body and use the poison typing instead. It's not going to hold you back too much. Now, Rhyperior. I really like Rhyperior, and I think it's very good. Solid Rock is a great ability to give to Pokemon. And Ground is really good. It has really strong offenses. Stealth Rock is great. Earthquake hits like a truck. And even if you have the rock typing, you can still do pretty good with Solid Rock. One of the builds that I've used, for example, is combining Rhyperior with Mew. It even has a Psychic Rock. It still tanks Earthquakes really well. There's not much else I can really say. Just really take advantage of Solid Rock. And one Pokemon I also really like is Muck. I think Muck is actually pretty good, and definitely one I think would be OU. The poison typing means they can use Black Sludge, and you have Toxic Spikes. And Knockoff is pretty good, considering entry hazards are just almost an auto win in this format if you can knock off the heavy duty boots. But above all else, Muck here is great because it has Sticky Hold. This Pokemon has an ability where you cannot knock off its item. That's great with Black Sludge, since it means that you can heal off pretty comfortably. But along with that, it's also great for Eviolite. Eviolite is pretty good if you can use a fully evolved Pokemon and another high base stat Pokemon. But sometimes, if you get knocked off, it's essentially like you're using a worse version of a fusion you could be using. For example, when I first started playtesting, the first team I did, I tried testing with Mew and Tangela, giving Mew high defenses, Eviolite, and Regenerator. But once it gets knocked off, why wouldn't I just use Tangrowth instead? That's where Muck comes in. And giving Muck the ability to have Eviolite Pokemon keep their Eviolite is fantastic. Think about things like Rhydon or Porygon 2. If they have to worry about their Eviolite being knocked off, they're just a defensive behemoth. And even for a Pokemon like Rhydon with no real recovery, Muck also has Pain Split. So even without leftovers of Black Sludge, you still have a way to keep yourself alive. It also helps that this format has plenty of wish support. So yeah, I'm pretty confident with keeping Muck in A tier. And Alolan Muck I think is very similar, but doesn't actually have Sticky Hold, so it's not actually as good. But when you don't have in Sticky Hold, you replace with the Dark typing, which is definitely pretty good. Something that I've done is I've used Muck with Kangaskhan. I get a Poison Touch, so you have a Fake Out, fishing for a chance to poison. Knockup's pretty good. And in general, Muck has very good defensive stats, which make it good when you're fusing different Pokemon. Very usable. Electrode, I think, is also usable. And I think I will put it in B. I'll put it, like, high up in B2. Because I think it'll be used enough to where it'll grant that ranking. Its speed is mainly the reason they use it, which is good because it means Electrode can be usable as a defensive, or not defensive, more like supportive Pokemon. Or you can use it offensively. Something that people should probably try is fusing it with Kadabra, so you can go back to using really powerful Mind Blows. Just keep in mind that it will be very frail. And Hisuian Electrode, I think is a little bit better, but that's only because you have grass coverage, but there's not too much to talk about there. Kangaskhan I really like, and I definitely do think Kangaskhan is enough for OU. And that's because Scrappy is just a really good ability. Scrappy, and then putting this with a fighting type or a strong normal type is already pretty good. But in general, Kangaskhan has very good defenses, which makes most of the things you fuse it with incredibly bulky, which gives Kangaskhan a lot of options. Unlike Cantonian Executor, I do think Alolan is enough to be OU. Although I do think Rapidash probably isn't enough now that I look at it. I think this... Yeah, I think this is good. The Dragon type just in general makes it easier to put Executor on teams, and isn't inherently limited to Sun teams either, since Dragon is a good typing both offensively and defensively. Hypno, I think there's no reason to really use it because it's not the worst. Kingor, I think is pretty alright, to be honest. Kingor has pretty good, it has high attack with Sword Stance. That's already pretty nice, but its stats are just good enough to where you can fuse it and make it bulky if you really want to. I know I fused it with Muk, and its defense was honestly a little bit better than I thought. So it's another example where you can use, Black Sludge, make it a water poison type with Sword Stance, and you can't knock off the Black Sludge. It has a lot of issues, especially defensively, or special defensively, I should say. But it's usable, and Crabhammer is also pretty nice. I like Starmie, but I don't think it's enough for OU just yet. It's really fast, but I think in Gen 9 it's just not enough. Especially when having to compete with fairy types. Starmie just isn't cooking a lot. Oh, I think I lost Machamp. Where'd the Machamp go? I'll look for Machamp later. For now, let's talk about Weezing. I think both forms of Weezing are good enough for OU. And both for different reasons. Now, for Galarian Weezing, it's probably the better one. And that's because neutralizing gas is just a great ability to have, negating the abilities of your opponent, and along with that, it has its own signature fairy move, and also just in general being fairy types really good. Also helps that with Levitate, it can allow you to give the fairy type to something, while also keeping a Pokemon's flying benefits. For example, use Galarian Weezing with Zapdos, and you have a electric flying type with Levitate. So it has all the benefits of electric without the weakness of being weak to ground. And obviously Electric Fairy is a great offensive core. And for Cantonian Weezing, it does have the fairy type. And you might think, what's the reason for using Galarian, or using Cantonian Weezing if you have Galarian? And the big reason is because it has a single typing. Again, when you fuse in the thing, the first Pokemon needs to be the head, and the second needs to be the body. And sometimes that just leads to combinations that you just aren't the biggest fan of. For example, let's say you want to fuse... what's an example? Let's say Golem. You want to fuse Golem and... Alolan Golem, I mean, and... Ninetales, I guess. Where... You can make it like an Ice Electric, or you can make it a Rock Fairy. Which, you might not want that exact combination. Especially since sometimes the stats are going to be different and bulkier on one side. So that's just the good thing about Weezing. It makes it where regardless of if it's the head or the body, it can still... you can choose between it. I'll look up exactly what I mean. So let's say it's Scizor, and let's say with, a Golem. Let's say you want Steel Electric. You want Steel Electric, so you can have Galvanize and Sap Bullet Punch, but you can't do that. But for, let's say, Weezing, it's only one option, but you can always choose between Steel or Poison still. Hopefully I got the point across, but if you didn't, I'm sorry. Gyarados, I think, is really good. I think Gyarados is very scary once you get a Dragon Dance off. And both Intimidate and Moxie are very good abilities. And because of just how bulky Gyarados is, it's also just pretty usable as a defensive mon, especially since Water is a good defensive type. Hitmontop is interesting. Fighting coverage is nice. Technician is nice. It has its own signature moves, but it's also a Pokemon I'm just not too knowledgeable with, so I unfortunately can't give my thoughts on it. Scyther and Pinsir are pretty neat, but I just don't think Bug's very good. Scyther especially suffers because not only are Flying and Bug pretty bad types to give someone, but has to compete with Scizor and Kleavor, so not much you can do. And then Pinsir, I think, is just too slow to really take advantage of its typing. Not to mention, it's not Gen 1 anymore, so Bug isn't a good defensive typing. Now, Mr. Mime I actually do think is pretty good, and that's solely because of Technician. Technician, the Fairy type. Use it with Gengar, for example, you can have Technician with a Ghost Fairy type with Draining Kiss, Hidden Power Ghost, Charge Beam, and Icy Wind. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Jinx is decently fast and has Wealthy Kiss and Ice coverage, but I just don't know how much it's going to be used. I could be wrong and it could be OU, but I'm not really seeing it. Hitmonlee, I think, is probably one of the better fighting types, but also one that I just don't think is going to be used. And I found Machamp again. I think Machamp is actually going to be OU, but on the lower end of it. No Guard and Guts are both good abilities to use, but I also think fighting in general just kind of suffers a lot from how many fairies are in the meta, and with how bulky everything is. But once Machamp gets off, it is incredibly terrifying. Well, I guess I already had Kadabra here. Alright, whatever. Cloyster, I think, unfortunately, just isn't very good. There are some fusions where you can make it be fantastic. For example, you fuse it with Steelix, and you can have a Water Ground type with 197 defense. That's insane. But I think the Ice typing for a lot of the fusions, as well as its really bad special bulk, really holds it back. I don't think Marowak has much going over it compared to Sandslash, but Alolan Marowak is definitely much more usable. The fire typing is kind of whatever, but having an immunity to the Will-O-Wisp is interesting. It's mostly the ghost typing, but the issue is that you have competition with Gengar and Annihilape, so I just think it's kind of the worst of the ghost types, not counting pre-evolves. Vaporeon's neat, but I also don't think it's going to be used a lot. It has good HP, and the water typing is always nice. But in terms of bulky water types, just use the Slow Twins. There's no reason to bother with anything else. Tangela I like, but I don't think Tangela's going to be enough to be an OU. Its main competition is its own evolution, Tangrowth. So what do you prefer between Eviolite or just more consistent, better base stats? I think the base stats are probably better if you ask me. Rhydon is in the very same boat, but I think it's probably the best of the Eviolite Pokemon. Because you just have really good offenses already. So fuse Rhydon with something, and it's probably going to take a lot of things out. And there is knockoff, but it's not that hard to fuse Rhydon with something that, you know, already has good stats to begin with. And even if you remove Rhydon's, Eviolite, it still used to be a fully evolved Pokemon at one point, so it's not the biggest loss in the world. Aerodactyl, I think, is pretty usable. But I also think Aerodactyl... Yeah, this makes more sense, yeah. But yeah, I also think Aerodactyl is good. But ironically, it might just be better by itself, since most of the time its fusions are slower than Aerodactyl is. Not much else I can really say, to be honest. Kabutops is cool, but I don't think there's much you can do with it. The Galarian version of Mr. Mime is probably a little bit more usable, because you have the same offenses as Jinx, and as far as I know, same abilities. But you also have access to Eviolite, which definitely helps out a lot. I love Tauros, but I think Tauros really struggles. It has sheer power, but normal just isn't as good as it used to be. And I think it really struggles with speed and bulk. Its regional forms are interesting, but I don't think they're going to see much play either, if you ask me. Now, Berserker, I think is interesting. Tough Claws is a good ability, but along with that, it also has an ability to boost steel moves. So combine this with a strong Pokemon or one that, like just like Tough Claws, and it could be a big threat. To be honest, if you combine it with something like Annihilate, I wonder if you use it for powering steel moves or just Tough Claws to make all physical moves better. Really makes you think. Electivire, I think compared to other electric types, isn't doing much. I think you can just kind of forget about it. And Wiki Wiki is kind of neat, but I think it's just outcompeted by both Kangaskhan and Snorlax. But I'll put it in C tier. Magnezone is good. Being able to trap electric types definitely makes it usable, but it's also... Steel types, ironically, I don't think are very omnipresent. But also at the same time, since it's Infinite Fusion, everything has good coverage, so you can trap steel types, but most of the time they'll have good coverage against you as well. I think Lapras has just enough bulk where it can probably make an OU, but on the lower end. You can combine it with something like Moltres and then give it Water Absorb, so you have a Fire Ice type that's not weak to water. That's pretty neat, but I don't know how much it's going to be used. We're not even going to bother talking about Seaking. And Hitmonchan, I think it's alright, but nothing too spectacular. Jolteon's pretty good, but I don't think it's enough for OU. I think we could probably put it like here somewhere. The speed's pretty good, and Volt Absorb you can definitely take advantage of, but I think that bulk really holds you back. Weavor, I think, like, in theory, having a free Stealth Rock should be really good, but not only do you have to give it something out of the Bug type or the Rock type, both of which are really bad defensively, but there's also a lot of pretty good Rapid Spin users. So I feel like the only Pokemon that you can really fuse Weavor with is ironically Scizor. And at that point, I think you're better off just using Scizor for better things. It's a good niche to have, but I just, not a big fan. Mr. Rime, I think, is probably just going to be worse than Galarian Mr. Mime, since if you're going to use something faulty with Ice and Psychic, you might as well have Eviolite with it. And Blossom, we're not even going to talk about. Surfetch I really like. It's a fighting type with Scrappy, which is very, very good to take advantage of. Overall, pretty unexplored, but one that I think will definitely pop off more. Because with Pokemon like Kangaskhan and Surfetch, Scrappy is just a good ability that often just gives Pokemon all the coverage they need, which is 1 or 2 attacks. Which I think is enough to make it OU. Kingdra is pretty good. Water type, good. Dragon type, good. Draco Meteor, good. And Swim, amazing. Kingdra has a lot of options, and I think it also helps that its stats are pretty even, just in general. It makes it pretty consistent with fusing with something. Alright, let's move on. Well, Trio is garbage, not talking about it. And Tangrowth is definitely OU. Or maybe not, okay, S2 is probably a little too much, but yeah, I think A2. Regenerator is really good, and the grass typing gives just more options for Regenerator Pokemon, and not just something that's weak to water. Or not water, weak to electric or grass. But I think the special defense of Tangrowth really holds it back, but at the same time, maybe it helps it keep it in check. It's cool that Almastar has Shell Armor and Swim, but probably not doing too much in the grand scheme of things. And Flareon having Guts is interesting. You can maybe take advantage of it with, I don't know, Scizor, but that's like the only thing that you can maybe do. Glaceon's probably not doing much. Leafeon is interesting, but I don't think it's doing much either. Maybe same with Chlorophyll. I think Articuno is actually pretty usable, though. You can make this thing pretty bulky, and just all you need to do is fuse it with the Steel type. You fuse it with any Steel type, and suddenly you have Corviknight, with really good defenses. It's like the one time where Articuno is actually glad it has higher special defense and special attack. At least in my opinion. Snorlax, I actually think is like good enough to be an OU. I've seen some people say it's mid, but I strongly disagree with that. It's basically, in many ways, a Chansey or Blissey, but has real attacking power as well. Snorlax, I just don't think the normal type holds it back that much, because it's really easy to fuse it with something that handles the fighting type weakness. Very obviously, the best things to fuse Snorlax with are either Psychic or most of the time Fairy Pokemon. And when you do that, Snorlax kind of becomes unkillable. Not to mention its normal stab can be taken advantage of with things like, let's say, Sylveon or Alolan Golem. Toadscroll I think is also pretty usable. I'll put it in B1. It's one of the few spike setters, which already makes it pretty good, but the ground typing also helps out a lot. It helps that you can have a very good defensive ground type while having all of the options that grass types do, such as Stun Spore or Sweep. I think it has Sleep Powder, but if it doesn't, it definitely has Leech Seed, which is pretty good. Alright, Screamtail. Screamtail is probably enough due to its bulk and offenses alone, but I think it does struggle from the fact that Boom Burst is banned. If Boom Burst wasn't banned, Screamtail would probably be Ubers. In theory, I think Articuno has the same thing with Cantonian, so I guess I'll put it here, but I just don't think the inclusion of Hypnosis is going to change a lot, but it's something to think about. Meanwhile, Mew is probably one of the best Pokemon in the format. It has the best move pool out of everything we have, and having 100 every stat means, regardless of what you're fusing it with, it's always going to have a very good base stat total. Add that with Teleport, Entry Hazards, or whatever you want, and Mew can help. The only thing holding Mew back is the fact that Psychic isn't really a good type, especially with Knockoff. And Steelix, I think, is also very, very usable. Steelix having super high defense is just fantastic. And you can use things like Stealth Rock, put it with a Rapid Spinner, give it Iron Defense and Body Press, and it can be very, very scary. I really like it a lot. Oh man, we still have a decent amount to go over. But spoiler alert, Magmortar isn't very good, but I've seen some people use it, I guess. Umbreon I like, but I just don't think it's going to be enough to be an OU. But the main thing with Umbreon is its pretty good defenses and Parting Shot. Porygon Z I think will be enough for OU, and that's because Adaptability and Download are both two very scary abilities. Adaptability is just self-explanatory. It gives stab to things and makes it very dangerous. And Download I think could be good on certain Pokemon. For example, fuse Porygon Z with like Electrode for example, and it doesn't matter if you get an attack boost or a special attack boost, it can hit pretty hard, and then you can have an attack boost with Stab Explosion to probably take something out. It's very usable. Now, the only reason that Ditto has anything going for it is the fact that it has its items that can boost speed or defense. But even then, I'm still only going to put it in C1 tier, and that might even be too generous. I'll have to see how some of the fusions do, but I'm just not impressed with Ditto's base stats. Espeon is definitely going to be an OU though. Magic Bounce is a great ability to have, and it gives Espeon on its own a great niche. Also helps that being an evolution, it has access to Wish, which is really, really good. Okay, we're getting near the end finally. Sandy Shocks is a electric ground type, which is already pretty good, and it also has access to spikes, so it just gives it a lot of options. It doesn't matter if it's defensive or offensive, you can probably make Sandy Shocks work. Zapdos as ever is still pretty good, and I think, ironically, most of the fusions Zapdos kind of doesn't want to fuse with. The only time it does is with something like the Weezings, where you give it Levitate. Outside of that, you're just using a regular Zapdos most of the time. Moltres is OU too, I think. I think having Flame Body is good. Good at Fences is good. Flying type coverage like Defog is great. U-Turn, also good. And I think the Galarian version is a little bit better. And also very scary. because Berserk can make any fusion with Galarian Moltres get out of hand really quickly. Also, the fact that it has high special defense means that, yeah, it can just... It's sometimes really hard to kill. Helps with the dark typing. If you add it with something like, let's say, a poison type, gives it not too many weaknesses. I really like Galarian Zapdos, and I think it's better. A1 might be a little... Some of you might see it as glazing, but I think it's really easy to fuse Galarian Zapdos with things that can really get out of hand. The one that I like is fusing it with Kangaskhan. If you use it with Kangaskhan, you go for Rest Talk with Facade and Thunderous Kick. It can hit every single thing in the format, including ghost types, and it'll either lower their defense or hit with Facade. And since it's sweeping, that counts as status, which means it does 140, which is really, really good. Crobat, I think, has a pretty good niche. Crobat being super fast with flying coverage is very handy. I personally use it with Porygon Z to get a surprise kill, but not too much to say, just pretty good. Scizor, I think, is probably the best Pokemon in the format, along with Clefable. Steel is very good. Technician with things with Kingdra is very good. And Scizor and Clefable together, I think, is the best fusion in the format. It can do anything you want. You can give it Unaware to go against Sweepers. You can make it a special attack with Calm Mind and have Technician boosted Draining Kisses. You can use Sword Stands with Bullet Punch. You can have Play Rough or Close Combat, Roost, Toxic, Stealth Rock. You can use Magic Arm instead of Technician. So you can use Life Orb with Bullet Punch and Draining Kiss. Anything you want, and those two together can help it achieve whatever you need. And obviously, Steel Fairy is just the best typing in the game. So that's my money for the best Pokemon, but let me know what you think in the comments. We're almost near the end. Porygon 2, probably the best Eviolite Pokemon. In fact, I'll probably switch Porygon 2 and Porygon Z. It's really bulky, has great coverage, recovery, status, anything you want Porygon 2 can use, and it has teleport, so even for pivoting, it's just fantastic. Annihilate, it's definitely going to be on the higher end, I think. I'll put it in A2, I think. Annihilate is just strong as ever, and both Fighting and Ghost are pretty usable. Some might say it's better to use it by itself, but I think you're better off fusing it with something to get rid of either its Fighting or Ghost weakness. Also, it's worth noting that Rage Fist is banned, so it's not going to get too out of control. Just a strong Pokemon overall. And last but not least, we have Politoed, which I'm going to put above Ninetales. In fact, I think I'll switch it, like... Yeah, I think this is good. Politoed is just good as ever. You can fuse it with things to, you know, give it the Dragon typing, which makes it good. You can give it Grass. Drizzle is very, very versatile, and Politoed can be a good Pokemon for rain teams. Or you could just make it do a lot of damage with Drizzle on its own. Very good in that aspect. But yeah, we're finally done. That honestly wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to go. Overall, there was a lot of options. And if you want to play in this tournament, the link is going to be both in the comments and in the description of this video. I really hope you join, because I think it's going to be a pretty fun format. And please let me know what you think about this format in the comments below. And tell me if you agree with my picks or not. Obviously, I didn't have enough time to go into detail with everything. Also, I guess Vileplume's here. There we go. But yeah, this was a fun video to make, but I definitely need to rest my voice now. I hope you'll be able to join me for this. It'll be a lot of fun. But until next time, this is Groundback, and I look forward to hearing from you.